Johnny Mac, welcome back, I guess for me, right? But it's good to have you back with me.
Yeah, who am I talking to?
Yeah, man.
Who is this?
So we got a lot to discuss. I know that so first off, 53, I know I'm sure they kind of touched on this yesterday, but no huge surprises, I guess. But do you think that this is the 53? Do you think there's still moves to be made before Sunday's game?
Well, they're going to make one. They put Crevan LeBlanc on injured reserve, so he'll be one of those designated to return players because he's not going to be out for the season. That's why they had to carry him on the original 53. So most likely they will bump up a tight end. They only kept two, which was a little bit strange. And Josh Perkins and Alex Ellis are on the practice squad, so that would be the most logical way to go about it. But as we know, I mean, if you look at the 90 players that came to training camp, I think the Eagles added 15 along the way. So Howie's always churning the back end of the roster, trying to improve in that way. So there's always a chance, but certainly for Sunday, you would think one of those two tight ends is going to be activated at some point this week.
Yeah. Now let's kind of go over it. Get your overview on this. Was there a surprise? Was there somebody that did not make this team that you were surprised about?
No, I think the bigger surprise, and I got 51 out of 53, and I missed the two tight ends, and one was Richard Rodgers, and that was more of it was a murky injury, so we didn't know if it was going to be long-term or short-term. If it was going to be short-term, I think they would have carried him on the 53 and done a similar thing to LeBlanc, put him on injured reserve after so they could bring him back potentially. Now his season is over, so that tells you his injury is more significant. And the other was Josh Perkins, because I thought the thought process was they're going to play more 12 personnel. They already played a lot. That's two tight ends. And if you're going to play more 12, well, you need backups in case something happens. But Doug explained that yesterday, and he explained it very well, just because they're going to play a lot of 12 personnel because Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert are really good. If one of them does get injured, well, then you're just going to play more 11 because then your receivers are better and deeper because you have the three starters along with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. So it makes sense from his perspective. It's based on the personnel and how good they are. They have two really good tight ends, but if one of them happens to go down, even if Richard Rodgers is here, you probably want J.J. on the field ahead of him, so you start playing more 11 and going in that direction. So it makes some sense from that standpoint. And they have a lot of playmakers, so they can go a lot of different directions when it comes to formations and personnel.
Yeah, and let's kind of go over these units real fast. Obviously, it's Wentz, the backup quarterback. Regardless of when Sudfeld's back, it's going to be McCown, correct? They're not going to switch those roles once Sudfeld's ready to go?
No, Josh is the backup. They bent over backwards to get him in here. They had been talking with him, trying to lure him out of retirement before Nate Sudfeld got hurt. Forget about Cody Kessler. So they wanted him to be the backup. He's the backup. They're even letting him go home on Friday. He coaches high school football, his son's high school football team in Charlotte. And that was one of the ways they got him to come in. They agreed he could leave to go coach his son's games and then come back. So they bent over backwards to get Josh McCown here to be the backup.
The running back room, we saw Wendell Smallwood. He didn't make it, and Josh Adams, he didn't make it. They both moved off. One's in Washington, one's in New York. It just seemed to be a very crowded room, and they had to get rid of their leading rusher from a year ago and a guy who has really kind of been their safety net.
Yeah, really, they're two leading rushers, and that doesn't happen very often. But, I mean, you have to be realistic and understand the reason that was because of injury. So while it is a strange circumstance, it's not like Josh Adams would have led this team in rushing if Jay Ajayi was healthy or even Corey Clement was healthy. And and even potentially Wendell Smallwood as he got later in the season when Josh himself got hurt. So it was a position they needed to upgrade, they needed to address, and they did in multiple ways. Trade pickup and Jordan Howard, draft pick and Miles Sanders. So they got a lot more talented in the backfield, and you bring in those two guys. Two guys had to leave, and it was the two most logical ones. The only question is, were you going to keep 5 running backs, and they decided not to, so that basically aced out both of them.
Obviously, the wide receivers are not a lot of surprise there. I guess Hollins was the one over Greg Ward. Ward ends up coming back over the practice squad, but you wrote about it, kind of the special teams and how he said it. Special teams is really, he asked, what did Ward do wrong or what more could he have done? He really didn't have an answer.
No, because he did. I mean, he's a better receiver. He outperformed Mac Hollins as a receiver, but Howie correctly pointed out, if you're the 5th receiver on an NFL team, you're not going to play receiver. Unless there's attrition in a really negative form as far as injuries go. You're just not going to get snaps at receiver. You're going to have to help on special teams, and that's why you start formulating a roster and understanding certain fits, and that's where Mac won out because he's got the history of a special teams player, really more so at the college level, but he at least projects to be better. And Greg, what hurt him, I mean, Greg was a star in college, star quarterback. So he was never playing special teams. So that hurt him.
Yeah.
And he's back on the practice squad. The Eagles were lucky enough to get him through waivers. But, yeah, it's tough. I mean, when you're a better receiver than another receiver and the other receiver makes the roster because of special teams, it's difficult.
Yeah, and then, of course, the offensive line. I mean, that was interesting because Wiz did make it. You had kind of hinted at that. They go with an undrafted kid, Herbert, up there, and Mailata sticks around. Obviously, they weren't going to get rid of him. But the offensive line, it's a veteran group, but a young group of guys behind them.
Yeah, but, I mean, and we talk about it all the time, Mike, that there are so many bad offensive lines in this league, and you saw it in Arizona. I mean, nobody here thought Brett Toth would be picked up on waivers. Nobody. The Eagles thought they would skate him through waivers and be able to put him on the practice squad. In Arizona, and Brett himself, he told us, remember, as an Army grad, he had 2 years of service he had to do until the government changed it and gave him a waiver. And when he got here, he admitted he was 290 pounds. He wanted to play at 315. He wasn't ready from a physical standpoint, and he's not going to be ready to play from a physical standpoint until he gets to build himself up. And it was the Eagles' plan to get him a year in the weight room and see if he could develop as a prospect. But the Cardinals are so bad on the offensive line, they gave him a roster spot. And this is all over the league. So you could argue Matt Pryor didn't look good in the preseason, but, man, if you put him on waivers, somebody's going to grab him quickly.
I was going to ask, is it because he's, hey, if the Eagles see something in him, we got to get our hands on this guy?
Well, that's partially it. I mean, the Eagles have a good reputation around this league. Jeff Stoutland has a good reputation around this league as an offensive line coach. So that certainly plays into it. And this is 2 years now. I mean, one of the reasons the Eagles have carried Jordan Mailata on the rosters because they thought they couldn't get him through waivers as a rookie. And that guy never played football. And they're probably right. They probably wouldn't have gotten him through waivers. So they tend to see offensive linemen they like and can develop. And the big part from Stoutland's perspective is the athleticism, and that's why Nate Herbig is here and Wiz is gone. And that's what they see in all these guys. That's the one trait they all have. Toth is very athletic. Herbig's very athletic. Mailata is tremendously athletic. And then Andre Dillard is off the charts, but he's a first-round pick, obviously. He's supposed to be. So that's what they look for, and they've done a very good job with those types of prospects.
Real quick, as we're kind of going through the tight end spot, they only kept 2. They did sign 2 to the practice squad. Game day, they're going to be 2 active tight ends?
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, you'll probably see one of them get activated, put on the active roster tomorrow before practice would be my guess. But, I mean, actually they don't have to do it till Sunday. But they do have a roster spot open because LeBlanc went on injured reserve. So the logical way to go, unless they're going outside the organization, and they had a couple players in, Craig James, they already signed to the practice squad, which we broke here at ESPN, 97.3. Chris Banjo was also a good special teams player. He was in for a workout. So they could go in other directions, but the most logical one would be to just elevate one of the tight ends.
On the defensive side of the ball, real quick, because there's a lot of injuries over there. Let's start there. Fletcher Cox, Nigel Bradham, Ronald Darby. Will we see those guys in week 1?
Well, Doug intimated we would. He didn't officially put his foot down and say everybody's playing. But everybody practiced really light, more of a walkthrough practice on Monday. And there's a lot of guys. There's a lot of names. Fletcher Cox, you can add Derek Barnett up front, Ronald Darby at corner, Nigel Bradham, Rodney McLeod. All of them are rehabbing from injuries and at different stages. Darby and Barnett probably the most advanced. Cox hasn't done anything in practice, but he told us a couple weeks ago he needed 1 week to prepare, and that's where we're here. So he's expected to practice Wednesday, and he's expected to play. But I think more than are they going to play, it's how much are they going to be able to play. In Darby's case, typically he's a 3-down player, is the best cornerback on this team. I find it hard to believe you can just throw him out there and play him every single play.
Well, lucky they got depth there.
Yeah, so maybe they have to mix in Rasul Douglas, give him a series off. We know they rotate up front. Fletcher's probably not going to be able to play his usual percentage of snaps. Maybe Derek Barnett doesn't play his usual percentage. And Nigel Bradham's the one guy because Nigel told us he doesn't know if he's going to be ready for week 1. Told us that 2 weeks ago. So that's the name to keep an eye on tomorrow when the first injury report comes out. And it looks like he's going to try to play, but again, he might not be able to play his usual number of snaps as a 3-down linebacker.
You got Barnett, Graham, Curry. The kid Hall makes the team as well. Do you anticipate, like a couple of years ago, we had the guy Means that always seemed to do well. Does Hall factor in? Is he a deactivated player on game day? I mean, what's that defensive end rotation look like?
I think he's going to be the 4th defensive end. He's earned it.
He's past those other guys.
Yeah, well, he's certainly past Sharif Miller. So it comes down to Sharif's going to be inactive and probably the entire year essentially is going to be a redshirt year for him unless injuries really take hold. So it comes down to is Josh Sweat or Deshaun Hall. And Deshaun just outplayed him. We'll see. I mean, there's more to it than just preseason games, but Deshaun also performed in practice. So I can't imagine that he wouldn't be that 4th defensive end, but the Eagles also do like Josh Sweat, so you have to at least put that into the equation. But I think it's pretty clear that Deshaun won that job.
We're looking at the Eagles roster, 53, getting ready for Washington. We got other things to dive into as well. If you look at, I guess, the safety spot, they ended up they kept Cyprian around. They got Sendejo out there still. What's Rodney McLeod looking like for, he did play a little bit in the preseason, but is all indications that he's going to be a similar player to the guy we saw his first year here?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a question mark, and Doug has admitted. I think that's the biggest question inside the Eagles locker room, inside the NovaCare complex. And I talk about it all the time. People just expect, like it's a Madden game, just expect to see the same guy come back after injuries. That's not always the case. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons Sendejo was brought in case Rodney McLeod isn't the same player. You have a veteran who's played a lot on some really good defenses and could step in and play at least at a solid level for you. So I think they've made a contingency plan, and there is no guarantee it's going to be the same player. So he's another name you got to circle.
Brandon Brooks, we didn't zone in on him specifically there, but they anticipate him playing Sunday?
He's in the category. Doug said he anticipates them all, and that includes Brandon. I find it hard to believe. That's the one guy I would say, even more than Nigel, I would say, I don't know why you're trying to push him out there so quickly. You have tremendous depth in Vitae, who's, I think, if anything, has played better at guard than he played at tackle. So I think you could certainly weather through a game with the Washington Redskins, who aren't very good, let's be honest, and not put a 6'5", 350-pound guy who's not even 8 months off an Achilles. I don't know. I look at how they handled Carson Wentz, and they were so cautious last year. I don't know why they would go the exact opposite direction with Brandon Brooks. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Talk with John McMullen at JF McMullen. Follow him on Twitter, Football at 4. All right, a couple other things that we want to dive into here. And obviously I don't know what Doug's supposed to say, but is this his most talented team? He said, I definitely think from a depth standpoint. Would you concur? You've been around the team through the whole Peterson run. Is this the best Eagles team entering September?
It's tough to say. You never know until you get at least a couple weeks into the season. Certainly on paper, it looks like the best. And Doug called it the deepest. I don't think there's any question. People always focus on the offensive skill position people. That's by far the best group Doug has ever had, by a wide margin. But I look at the defense, and I look at all those guys coming back from injury. That's my concern. They're big names, but are they going to be the same players? If they are, yeah, this is the best team he's had. But if some of them struggle, and you can go back to last year, they had some of the same issues with guys rehabbing, slow start for Brandon Graham. Well, if there was a slow start for Brandon Graham, why isn't there going to be a slow start for Fletcher Cox or Derek Barnett? Or Ronald Darby as well, who was, last time I saw him in a full practice, still had the brace on, and after said he hated the brace and couldn't stand it. So if the doctors are going to force him to wear that, is he going to be the same player? I don't know.
Well, I think that whole corner, because he admitted that Jones and Darby are going to be the guys, and then I guess you're going to see Maddox on the inside there, but it seems that there's a lot of depth there that could just be semantics.
No, it's not semantics. I mean, this team, and I've been telling people since the spring, they think Ronald Darby is the best cornerback on this team, and it's not close, and he is when he's healthy. And Sidney's going to be the other outside corner. Vontae's going to be the slot corner. And then Rasul will mix in from there. I do think Rasul will play a little bit more early in the season because, as I said, you probably don't have that full workload for Darby yet. You want to ramp him up. Mm-hmm. But without LeBlanc, remember he's on injured reserve. I don't think they're nearly as deep as people think they are. And even, by the way, I mean, Sidney's got tremendous talent. We all know that, but he hasn't proven it. And Avante, I think people forget because he did so well last year that he's still a young player. So I think you're going to see some growing pains in the secondary.
Yeah, John, and that secondary, which has a lot of depth there. We know, the names Douglas and Maddox were guys who sometimes people ask why they don't get playing time, and Maddox, we're wondering, is it going to be inside or outside? Jones is a guy that we think's better on the outside. I find it will be interesting to see what will happen with Jones, where they kind of use him. If they start him on the outside, are they going to slide him inside here and there? So I think there's still, once we get – because we didn't really see how that materialized in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, each day, what Jim did, Rasul started at right corner because Ronald Darby wasn't healthy, and then Avante and Sidney Jones would rotate each day. One would start outside, the other would play the slot, and he was just trying to get the best feel for those two particular players. Ultimately, I always thought because of his size and he's a natural slot corner, Avante would end up inside. That's where they've landed. And it works out because Sidney always says, I always tell you, anytime you talk to Sidney Jones about playing the nickel, he starts every answer with, well, I'm an outside corner, but it's good to be versatile. I mean, he's much more comfortable playing outside, and he's not physical. And you have to be physical if you're a slot corner. You have to have those run fits and stick your nose into it from run support standpoint. And even though Avante Maddox is small, short, I should say, he's very adept at that. So that was the natural fit, and that's how it's ended up.
We also saw that they brought in a quarterback, Kyle Lauletta. They let Thorson go. Obviously, we talk a lot about drafting a guy. They drafted him in the 5th round. They let him go. They brought Lauletta in here. You got that. You got Smallwood going from Philly to Washington, who they'll play this week. And Doug did admit that it's a real thing. Teams trying to get intel there. They also brought Trayvon Hester in, who is, of course, the guy who got his fingertip field goal in the Bears game there. So the Redskins are trying to get intel on both offense and defense.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to put the context on that. You said, yeah, they'll ask. I mean, you bring in a player, you always ask, but it's going to have nothing to do with game planning. So, I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff gets overrated. Wendell Smallwood is certainly. I mean, the issue with the Redskins is they're not very good, and they're trying to bring in players they think are better than what they had. So it wasn't about getting intel for this week's game. It was more of they know the Eagles. They know Wendell Smallwood. They know Trayvon Hester because they play them twice a year.
Right.
They know the type of players they are. And they thought they were better and could make their roster better. And that's the thing. I mean, sometimes Doug has been here for a while. Jay has been in Washington. They play each other twice a year. These two teams know exactly what they're trying to accomplish, what the other side is trying to accomplish. And Wendell Smallwood and Trayvon Hester, that's not going to change that. The Redskins already knew what the Eagles want to do.
Well, it all happens this Sunday right here on 97.3 ESPN. The countdown to kickoff starts at 10 a.m. Tony Bruno with live coverage of the Eagles and the Redskins. Merrill and Mike, they have the play-by-play. Starting at 1, John McMullen will be there, and football at 4 all week long to get us ready as we take a closer look at this game on tomorrow's show. We get closer to a real football game, and, of course, we will get into all the NFL news. By the way, John, do you think Zeke Elliott will play in Week 1?
I do, and that tells you what the preseason means. I think he'll come in just in time, magically.
Okay, and there's some reports out there. I did see this earlier. Chris Banjo, I'll ask you about him real quick. Any news on his workout?
I'm on the phone right now, so unless everything happened in the last half hour, he worked out with Craig James yesterday, and the Eagles have an open spot, and that's generally what they're looking for at the bottom end of the roster, special teams talent, and he's been very good in New Orleans and Green Bay, so he's another logical way to go.
All right, football at 4. Use that hashtag on Twitter at JFMcMullen. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.
And Johnny Mack, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.